Call the CAMPO board to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Bagwell.
Here.
Vice Chair Novak.
Here.
Commissioner Dodson. Here. Commissioner Erb. Commissioner Maloney.
Here.
Commissioner Henderson.
Here.
Commissioner Schutte.
Here.
And ex officio member Rosenberg. Microphone, please.
Kevin Very, alternate to Sandra Rosenberg.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We're now on to agenda item 3, which is the opening public comment for CAMPO. Do I have any public comment? Okay, we're going to move on then for agenda item 4A, which is the minutes of October 9th, 2024. Do I have any changes or corrections, members? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion for approval.
Move approval of the minutes.
I will second.
I have a motion and a second for approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. We're now on to agenda 5A, which is a super exciting time, and I'd love it if you would all join me on the floor so we can do this proclamation. couldn't do this right. Here, let me dump this back up there. I grabbed the wrong thing and then went back for this and left that. Okay. So it's a great time. We do this a lot at the Board of Supervisor meetings, yet it's rare for us as CAMPO to be able to celebrate all of the good work and all of our public safety and crash responders. It's really phenomenal to see all of you here today for us to celebrate. So this proclamation is for you, and then for you to share with your staff, right? To let them know how appreciative we all are of your service. So, whereas law enforcement officers, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, road maintenance crews, public service utility workers, and tow operators place themselves in danger every time they work within inches of vehicles traveling at highway speeds to conduct valuable life-saving operations in adverse weather conditions, maybe like today, you're blown away. And whereas it is imperative that we promote safer incident scenes through public education and awareness to protect all responders as they courageously work to clear incidents. Whereas Responder Safety Week serves as an opportunity for the Department of Public Safety, Nevada Highway Patrol Division, the Nevada Department of Transportation, and other first responder agencies to participate in coordinated efforts to educate the public and bring awareness to first responder safety, and to promote effective traffic incident management strategies and training for first responders. Whereas, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administrator, less than 30% of Americans are aware of move over laws and fail to abide by them. Amazing, huh? Just so used to traveling on the roads, they just aren't paying attention, but it's a good training one. Whereas Nevada is committed to effective traffic incident response and management through collaboration and training, which reduces the duration and impacts of traffic incidents and improves the safety of motorists, crash victims, and emergency responders. And whereas over 1,500 first responders have participated in the Nevada Traffic Incident Management Coalition efforts throughout the state since 2014, and 79% of all first responders in Nevada have received traffic incident management training. Is that all of you? Yes? Ooh. Carson City's really good in CAMPO because we just hit 100% instead of 79. I like that. We're bragging, we might as well, right? And then whereas during Crash Responder Safety Week, CAMPO remembers and honors those national first responders who lost their lives in 2023. 14 law enforcement, 8 fire EMS, 20 tow operators. That would never have occurred to me. And 3 DOT SSP for a total of 45 first responders. Therefore, I, Lori Bagwell, Chair of the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, do hereby proclaim the week of November 18th through the 22nd, 2024 as Crash Responder Safety Week in the CAMPO region. So Carson City, Douglas, and Lyon. What an exciting thing to see all of our counties come together and recognize that it's all of your roles to help us keep yourselves safe, right? As well as all those potential victims out there. So thank you for all that you do to protect us. Right? Is that true? Yahoo! You got to come closer for a picture, and I just can't help myself. Thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you guys. You really are hard workers, and thank you. Tell your whole team. Really pass that on with the whole team, because I know it's not any one of us. I will be more than happy. Does anyone want to make a comment about safety in your area? None of you? You're all off the hook? Okay, I'm letting you off the hook then. Don't say you didn't get a chance. But thank you all again so very much. Really, it's appreciated. Really, really, thank you. That's this. Okay. Yeah, that was kind of neat. Like I said, we rarely get to do something here to say thank you across all of our counties, so that was pretty good. Okay, we're going to move on then to Agenda 6A, discussion and possible action regarding the CAMPO Zero Emission Transition Plan, including potential approval of this plan. Ms. Norman, can you take us through a summary of this,
Yes,
please?
thank you, Madam Chair. Kelly Norman, Senior Transportation Planner. I'd like to introduce CDM Smith, who has been helping CAMPO staff with the Zero Emission Transition Plan and will be presenting the plan and its components to the board today.
Perfect.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, CAMPO board members. My name is Brian Stewart, and I have the pleasure to be the project manager for your Zero Emissions Transition Plan. Today, we will provide some of the highlights of our work to develop a complete but flexible plan for your consideration. With me today is Sarah Coe, and Jeremy Gilbride, the expert who allowed us to get here today. So they did the work. So today we will cover the following items and make it quick, but at the end we'll be open for some questions for that. So Sarah, could you provide some of the background for our Zero Emissions Transition Plan?
Yeah, thanks so much. Oh, a little closer. Thanks. All right, so first of all, why was this project performed? Communities that are transitioning from a fossil fuel-powered fleet to a zero-emission fleet can experience a number of benefits. These include reduced operational costs, reduced air quality pollutants, as well as the opportunity to support decarbonization of regional transit networks. The Federal Transit Administration, through its low or no emission grant program, is offering federal cost sharing to help agencies through this transition. The grants fund zero or low emission buses at an 80% federal share, and they fund supporting facilities and equipment at a 90% federal share. In order to compete for these funds, transit agencies must have a zero emission transition plan. So a zero emission transition plan needs to address these topics. It needs to have a strategy for fleet management, as well as the associated infrastructure. It needs to address the cost of the transition, as well as identify possible funding resources. The plan needs to look at policies that could impact the zero emission transition, as well as look at collaboration with the local utility provider. And finally, the plan needs to identify impacts of this transition on the existing workforce. To develop these plan components, we started with data gathering on Jump Around Carson's current state. How many vehicles are there, and what are the requirements for the fixed routes and the paratransit services? Conversations with internal stakeholders was a very important piece of this data gathering exercise. We wanted to understand the nuances of operations at Jump Around Carson, as well as the fleet and facility teams that support it. We also had some great conversations with members of the Regional Transportation Stakeholder Coalition that provided important insights into public perception. We conducted interviews with other transit operators in the region, asking how their zero-emission transition systems are working for them, getting an understanding of their resources, as well as some insights into their lessons learned. We then took all of that information and used it to evaluate market-ready options for Jump Around Carson. These included hydrogen fuel cell buses, battery electric buses, and electric hybrids.
All right. Excuse me. All right. Now I will talk about some of the specific recommendations within the Zero Emission Transition Plan. Based on the data that we gathered and the many conversations we've had with the various transit stakeholders, it is our recommendation that the pusher buses that are currently used in Jump Around Carson's fixed route services be transitioned either to 30 or 35-foot battery electric buses, also known as BEBs. BEBs would require overnight charging at the Jump Around Carson yard and would require mid-route charging at a transfer area periodically throughout the day. We're recommending that this deployment occur in phases, starting with a phase 1, an initial deployment, which would only consist of 2 buses. In phase 2, the remaining pushers would be gradually transitioned to battery electric buses as the current fleet vehicles reach the end of their useful lives. This 2-phased approach is really important because it gives Jump Around Carson and CAMPO time during phase 1 to gather performance data and then to use that data to hone and further refine some of the development considerations and vehicle specifications that would be needed to enact phase 2. Both phases would require some upgrades to the infrastructure at both the Jump Around Carson yard and a potential mid-route transfer area. Therefore, we're also recommending that buses that would enter service before that infrastructure, before the infrastructure upgrades could be completed or would be expected to be completed, would instead be hybrid diesel-electric buses. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the economic factors that inform that recommendation in a moment. But before I move away from the recommendations, I want to just briefly touch on the Jump Around Carson assist fleet. Electric cutaway buses, which are used by the Jump Around Carson assist fleet, are not really commonly used in transit at this time, or electric varieties are not. And so we are recommending holding off on transitioning any of those buses to battery electrics or hybrids until later in phase 2, at which point Jump Around Carson can evaluate how these types of vehicles have performed for other transit agencies, as well as how their market availability will change in the future. We anticipate that as the technology continues to evolve and the market continues to emerge, that Jump Around Carson will gradually, eventually transition these vehicles as well to battery electric or hybrid options. Sorry, next slide. So there are a few kind of key maintenance differences between the needs of battery electric buses as compared to conventional diesel buses. One key difference is the weight. Battery electric buses are going to be typically heavier than their conventional diesel-fueled counterparts, just due to the presence of the heavy batteries. Fortunately, for Jump Around Carson's specific deployment, in our stakeholder communication with the Fleet and Facilities team over at the Department of Public Works, we've learned that the existing vehicle lifts that are already in use at that site are sufficiently weighted for the battery electric buses that would be included in this recommendation. And so it is not expected that any significant changes would be needed to address these vehicle weights relative to the existing maintenance facility. Another difference is the occasional need to access roof-mounted batteries or electronics. This would require the use of a small man lift or similar equipment with reasonable fall protection. The last and probably most significant difference is, of course, the batteries. Under the zero-emission transition, a dedicated space would be needed to safely store any spare batteries or any retired batteries from battery electric buses. And both that area and any of the maintenance bays designated to work on battery electric buses would need to be upgraded with fire suppression systems designed to handle lithium battery fires. And there's more specific information about that in the plan for anyone looking for some more specifics on battery electric or lithium battery fires. And of course, the last little change is that we would need a small, low-powered charger installed at the maintenance facility just to allow buses that have undergone maintenance to charge up enough to return to the Jump Around Carson yard. Apologies. There are also training considerations of the zero-emission transition. This would affect both drivers and maintenance personnel. On the driver side, drivers would need training on how to effectively use regenerative braking, which is a core feature of these battery electric or hybrid diesel vehicles. This would allow them to get the most range and the most efficiency out of these vehicles. They would also need training on vehicle charging procedures, safety and emergency considerations, and different vehicle startup and shutdown procedures. On the other hand, maintenance personnel would need training on the specific drivetrains and other hardware systems of battery electric buses, as well as some training on the bus software, which varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, and safety training related to high voltage bus and or charger components. In reaching out to peer transit agencies, one key takeaway that we learned was that the strategy of hiring an original equipment manufacturer, an OEM technician, to serve as an on-site advisor, trainer, and champion of the technology has been found to be very, very helpful and very, very beneficial, both in the short and long term of these transition programs. A portion of the FTA's low and no grant funding that Sarah spoke about earlier can be used to help pay for this service. And certainly not least, we need to consider the costs, the economics. No program can really be successful unless it makes financial sense. This figure is an excerpt from the plan, and it illustrates some of the costs of owning and operating 2 buses. This represents generally phase 1 of the transition and shows the rolling total cost over the 12-year useful life of those 2 buses. The costs shown here, which are in 2022 dollars, include the capital costs of purchasing buses, the capital cost and an estimate of the installation costs for all the infrastructure needed to operate those buses, including chargers and utility upgrades, and the anticipated fuel and maintenance costs associated with operating those vehicles throughout those 12 years. These totals that are shown in the figure reflect only the local shares. This is after accounting for the FTA's capital and operational contributions for both the conventional diesel buses and for the low and no emission bus options. One thing I want to point out here is the solid teal line, which serves as something of a baseline and shows the rolling total cost of 2 conventional diesel buses. And as you can see by looking at year 1 on the figure, conventional diesel buses have the lowest upfront capital cost. However, due to the higher costs of operations and maintenance, the rolling total cost ends up breaking even with the hybrid buses only after about 5 years. And it breaks even with the battery electric bus option that we're recommending at about 10.5 or 11 years. The key takeaway is that by the end of the 12-year useful life, both battery electric buses and hybrid buses would be expected to result in lower overall local costs as compared to the conventional diesel buses that everyone's familiar with.
Just to be clear, that's only the local cost, not the overall cost.
That is correct, yes.
I just want to be clear.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's also important to note that the total costs shown in this figure include one-time costs, such as infrastructure upgrade costs for the battery electric buses. Future battery electric bus purchases may be able to make use of some of that infrastructure, for example, utility upgrades, and thus future purchases after this initial period could be even more cost-effective than shown here. Now I'm going to hand the stage back to Sarah to talk about a few of the other benefits that can be found associated with the program.
Thanks, Jeremy. So although we acknowledge that the FTA funding is the big driver for this transition, there's a lot of important benefits that decarbonizing Jump Around Carson's fleet can bring to the community. We know that Nevada Senate Bill 254 established statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. The electrification of Jump Around Carson's fleet would be an important way for Carson City to contribute to those goals. Our quantification of greenhouse gas reductions for electric buses shows that the increase in emissions from higher electricity consumption is actually outweighed by the reduction of emissions from the tailpipe. This leads to a 66% reduction of overall greenhouse gas reductions over the bus's 12-year useful lifespan. In addition to this, the electric buses would reduce air quality pollutants as well as noise pollution. Looking a bit outside of Jump Around Carson, the efforts to electrify the transit system would lay some important groundwork for other Carson City agencies. For example, other Carson City departments could leverage Jump Around Carson's chargers for their initial deployments. In addition to that, the fleet maintenance team at that point will have had some more experience working on electric vehicles. Jump Around Carson's infrastructure could also potentially be shared with other transit agencies in the region. A mid-route charger installed at the transfer area could support the electrification of both RTC Washoe as well as the Tahoe Transportation District. This would lead to even more of the environmental and social benefits that I mentioned earlier. And so before we close, we wanted to cover a couple of quick acknowledgements. The funding for the development of the Zero Emission Transition Plan was provided by NV Energy's Transit Electrification Grant Program. The numerous resources you see here and their teams, both internal and external to Carson City, supported the development of the Zero Emission Transition Plan. These people and their team members offered a lot of their time and energy to provide their knowledge and insights, and we are incredibly grateful for their contributions. And with that, we thank you all very much for your attention, and we would be happy to take any questions at this time.
Does anybody have any question? That's way too easy. We've got to come up with something. Oh, we don't want to let you off that hook that easy. So how about I have go ahead.
Yeah,
do have
no,
a
it's a thorough report, you know.
Yes.
You guys did your homework and there was a lot to digest. Do you think it would work recharging in front of at the terminal in that 10 to 15 minute window? And I don't know if you can really keep the schedule. You can guarantee that. It sounded a little iffy to me. And I also had the concerns of the overall lithium battery fire issue that you need
Storage.
quite a bit of water. And, you know, I think the theory's good, but I don't know if Carson's ready to take on this big step right now. I know it would work, but I think we also have some other plans for that transfer center on Plaza Street as well. So trying to tie all this together at the same time might be difficult. And I guess the last thing, I know I'm speculating here, but with the change of administration, I don't know if FTA is going to stay in this business.
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions. So maybe we'll try and take it piece by piece, if that's all right. So your first question was regarding the ability to charge an electric bus at a mid-route charging station. So right now, your buses have a 10 to 15 minute period where the buses pull into that region in front of the state building, or the federal building, excuse me. And the drivers can use the restroom, things like that. And people can transfer into different lines. Something that I think is important to keep in mind is that the size of the charger that would be put at that location is a much higher, has a much higher capacity than the chargers that would be installed at the Jump Around Carson yard. And so because it's much stronger essentially, then it can charge much more quickly than the speed at which the buses would be charged overnight. Anything to add there?
Yeah, and just to add a little bit of context and put a few numbers to that, a pretty typical mid-route charger would be able to add somewhere in the order of 25 to 30 miles of range to one of those buses in about 10 or 15 minutes of charging. And so these standard range battery electric buses, which are the ones that are ultimately recommended in the plan, would only really need to charge 2, maybe 3 times during the day. So it's not like every cycle they have to charge there, but they would need another 1 or 2 charges throughout the day to make the route work. And I'd also note that, when we were analyzing the range capabilities of the buses, we were really focused on the worst case scenario. We looked at sub-freezing conditions, maximum warranted battery maximum allowable degradation of the batteries under the manufacturer warranties. So generally speaking, the buses will always be able to make these, generally speaking, the buses will be able to make the routes without even needing more than one mid-route charge. But at the end of their life, they might need to top up 2 or maybe 3 times throughout the day, depending on which route. Some are longer than others.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So for the next question, it was related to concerns about fire suppression systems. Is that right? Yeah, so admittedly, as more and more transit agencies are making this transition, there's kind of a couple different schools of thought on how to address fire suppression systems. A lot of the major concern right now is related to storing a large number of these buses in a small enclosed space, as a lot of transit agencies are storing them in yards where they're very close together. And so the concern is that if a fire were to be started in one bus, it would spread very quickly to the other equipment. We would envision that for Jumper on Carson, because the fleet itself is a little bit on the smaller side, and we would anticipate that maintenance would happen on 1, maybe 2 of these buses at a time, that risk is substantially lower. I can't necessarily quantify that for you at this time, but I would say that's something to consider. Anything else there?
Yeah, I mean, just also pointing out that that's a really valid point, right? Lithium battery fires are a potential concern, and it's important that, like I think you had mentioned, right, lots of water is exactly the recommendation for how to deal with those. So it's just a matter of taking the steps to install the systems that could be used to treat those types of incidences. And then the preventative safety measures, right? Having a designated space to store spares and things like that to help reduce the potential as much as humanly possible. But yeah, it's absolutely a concern.
I know that you had one last kind of comment about administration change. Yes,
They're gonna
certainly.
pull
And
the money back. Yeah.
I don't know if we could necessarily, I think at this point, of course, it's a bit too speculative at this time, but just acknowledging that, of course, all the numbers that we showed for the total cost of ownership, like Jeremy said, these are out-of-pocket costs. And so if those federal match funds change, of course, those numbers would look different. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
And just one quick addition to that, the Zero Emission Transit, or rather the Low and No Grant Program, it's specifically beneficial for infrastructure improvements. When we're talking about purchasing of the bus, the funding that can be acquired under the ADA side of things, the American with Disabilities Act, is actually equivalent to what you could get under the Low No program. And so, if the, in this speculative world where the funding is either more difficult to get or isn't available, I think it's important to note that the benefits that we showed with in terms of cost savings for the hybrid diesel electric buses could still be realized, as the same cost sharing under ADA could apply to that. Now, it's Wild West as to what happens from here, but.
So let's talk about the proposals for implementation. So when is it that this plan is anticipating that we would be purchasing which types of bus? So in this next, when would we start the electrification buses? I always look at everything in a process or in a scope. So what, if I'm approving this plan today, what is it that people would expect to be happening and when?
So thank you for that question, Madam Chair. Chris Martinovich, Transportation Manager. To answer your question, I think it's somewhat dependent on guidance we received tonight from this board. I think it's somewhat dependent on guidance we received from the Regional Transportation Commission. And we start the process, should it be approved tonight, we would start the process to look at what grants are available, when are they available, what are our local matching sources, what are our options through our budget cycle with Carson City to fund some of these improvements and start aligning what we can align from a funding perspective to implement some of the recommendations and chase some of the grants that we would obviously need to do to deliver this type of program. So a lot of that is, subject to shift. CDM Smith has done a great job outlining, a potential schedule, and I could see that shifting, out if needed. It could shift forward if needed, and we can move phases apart. I think the concept that they've presented here provides us a guideline of kind of the timeline. When the go button is, I think, is still a little bit to be determined based on those factors I mentioned earlier. I will say that we do need to purchase some buses, fixed route buses now. If this plan is approved, what we would look at, what staff would essentially do first is we would look at the cost comparison for diesel pushers versus diesel hybrid pushers, and we'd probably move in that direction immediately because we need to get some new pusher buses on the road sooner rather than later. So I don't want the infrastructure piece to necessarily delay the purchase of buses any longer than they've been. So that's where we would start with essentially on day one with this plan.
So then my other question goes, I see that you did some discussions with other transit operators and looking at those processes. And so serving on TDD, I get that beautiful job. We've had to, as you say, push the targets out because we're unable to deal with some of the other infrastructure concerns or issues, or that the buses just couldn't make the hills, and so I'm always concerned about being on a cutting edge of a technology or a process versus a tried and true. And so I guess that's what I'm not hesitant to say that if I can eliminate diesel buses, because I think anyone standing near a diesel bus would say that's the smelliest thing you've ever had the pleasure of doing. But what I want to make sure is I don't end up with gaps of service to the clients. And that's what we ended up having to buy diesel buses at TDD. And it's like, wow. So we ended up just having to go ahead and buy more diesel. And then that pushes your program 6 and 7 years because you're going to get a useful life from those buses and things like that. Or what was the name of the firm that went? Protec? Yeah. So Proterra, right? So then they have buses, and now what do? You have buses that can't be serviced. And that's what I mean. I'm not interested in Carson City being on that cutting edge out there, sitting with 3 or 4 buses that you can't do anything with the bus. So help me understand what I'm doing here as an organization as CAMPO. Is it really that we're saying we're going to adopt a plan that keeps being reviewed for its reasonableness, and so we can keep moving the target, but it moves together in its target? Like, I got to put that infrastructure in and then I can buy the bus. And so if I move target 1 because something isn't working, the whole plan just kind of scoots with it. I guess that's what I'm really interested in, because I don't want to have a promise out there to people that think suddenly we're buying this kind of bus. Does that make sense?
You want me to take a swing, Sarah?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, those are really, really valid and good questions. I think the first thing to consider is the market is not quite as cutting edge as it used to be. I know a lot of the transit agencies that have suffered using battery electric buses, especially in the past decade, were using Proterra buses. And when they purchased those buses originally, it was an era where the chargers were also Proterra chargers. everything in the process was proprietary. And so once you had bought into the system,
You're stuck.
yeah,
Yeah,
you got to
that was a
pay
good
whatever they say it costs to repair.
You're stuck.
You got to buy their buses because that's the infrastructure you bought. And that was the way of things for, I mean, most of the past 15, 20 years. Nowadays, it is beginning to become a lot more open. Our plan does recommend a few different charger manufacturers that are manufacturing chargers at an open standard, meaning they will work with any manufacturer's bus. They won't just work with a New Flyer bus or a Gillig bus or Phoenix, who bought Proterra, or anything like that. So that definitely helps to alleviate some of the concerns where if a charger goes down, there are other people who can maintain them as well. Or if a bus is, if you don't like one of the buses, let's say you have there's an issue with the supply chain for one of the manufacturers, and this can happen with any kind of bus, whether it be diesel or hybrid or electric, but say in phase 1, there's an issue with the supply chain for one of the buses. Well, in phase 2, that's part of what the data gathering in phase 1 is about, is you then have the option to look at other manufacturers under phase 2 and still be able to use that open standard charging infrastructure that is recommended for phase 1. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the first element about the charging side of things. And then with regards to just the bus capacity and their performance, Jump Around Carson and Campo is fortunate that a lot of these routes are, pardon?
Flat.
Yeah, very flat. Yes, yes,
It's
not
true.
hilly.
Right.
So a lot of those.
Yeah.
A lot of those challenges wouldn't manifest here, so to speak. And yeah, I think from just the research that we've put in and the other agencies that we've reviewed case studies for, we looked at a Duluth, transit agency in Duluth, who have quite cold weather, that they were able to perform to the agency's expectations. And we expect the same thing here for the buses recommended and yeah, in the plan. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
Not really, no. I think Jeremy covered most of it. I would say just kind of to piggyback onto Jeremy's last point is that some of the important considerations we made for these recommendations, we really tried to look at literature and other service areas that could be comparable in terms of the conditions that exist here in Carson City, both the climatological as well as the topographical ones. And so the graphic that you see over here, it's kind of a lot of text, but tries to convey that we took into account things like how a bus at the end of its useful lifespan, in year 10 to 12, is going to have a degradation of that battery over time. And because of colder conditions, you're going to have a lower mileage that you can achieve on the same charge because you're not going to have that regenerative braking coming into play. And so just some other considerations for what we incorporated into our recommendations.
Ms. Maloney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions. Did you look at what is the useful life of the charging infrastructure, and was that considered as part of your cost modeling?
Great question, and thank you. Yes, so we, in the total cost of ownership analysis, we intentionally did not present a scenario for the battery electric buses where the infrastructure was not also included. And part of that is the useful life. A charger can be expected to last anywhere from 10 to 15 years, depending on the manufacturer. At least they're warranted to those kinds of lifespans. And they're fairly reliable unless you hit them with a truck or something along those lines. Other infrastructure, and this is actually what makes up the bulk of the infrastructure costs, about 80% of the infrastructure costs, would be utility side upgrades like transformers, the laying of underground conduit that could support the chargers, And the lifespan for those kinds of things, those kinds of upgrades can be upwards of 30 years, just based on FAA suggested lifetimes. So those are the kind of lifetimes that can be expected at a minimum for those types of upgrades.
Thank you. And I apologize, but I was unclear in the response to Greg's question earlier about the charging time at the layover. So what, even if we get the super duper fast charger, what are we talking about? 30 minutes?
Yeah, so, and actually, I'm so glad Sarah opened up this slide here. So we have the standard range buses, which are the ones we're recommending, which in their worst case, sub-freezing conditions, battery is all degraded, would get about 108, maybe 110 miles. Campo's routes, including the dead miles, would be about 150, 160 miles, and a bus can be expected to get about 25 to 30 miles of range from charging 15 minutes at a typical mid-route charger, one of those higher voltage fast chargers or higher wattage fast chargers. And so doing the math, roughly half an hour per service day of mid-route charging would be needed per bus if that bus is to do the full day's route on a weekday. On weekends, a mid-route charger probably wouldn't be needed, as the routes are a little shorter.
Thank you. Can I keep going on my questions? Can the city landfill handle recycling of the batteries, or what would we do with the batteries?
Another great question. End of life for batteries is tough. It's a tough thing to consider.
Maybe it's a question for Public Works. I mean, do we handle batteries now?
No.
So we would have to outsource the batteries somewhere. Has there been any research done on who accepts batteries nearby?
At this time, that was not included in the zero emission transition plan.
That's okay. I'll keep going. No worries.
Oh,
On the fleet maintenance training that would be required, presumably this would be done and the staff IFC charges would come to transit. Already over a quarter of Transit's annual budget goes to those IFC charges, which take directly from our general fund that we're able to spend on, say, operations. Have we, as staff, looked at that budget and what those maintenance training impacts would be and if we could absorb them?
Thank you, Commissioner Maloney. Chris Martinovich, Transportation Manager. Part of the components that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this for the 5339 funding, is a portion of those costs, and I want to say 5% of those costs can be used to specifically cover training of staff. And so a portion of those grant funds would be used to train our fleet maintenance staff on how to maintain those battery electric buses or even diesel hybrid buses. So there would be grant funding in addition to what we have to help train staff on using those vehicles.
Thank you. I understand that on paper that sounds good. In the past, fleet staff don't bill to transit grants, so this would be a change in operational things. Is that something that's been discussed behind the scenes, that fleet staff would start billing to our transit grants?
We haven't discussed starting to bill to our transit grants, but we certainly could.
Okay. Moving on. Have you, and probably this is a question for Chris, has Jack's transit operator committed to the additional training required of drivers in the plan for no additional cost to our contract?
The training, First Transit operates a variety of services across the country, and so they use battery electric buses. They have programs in place that can help us roll out those types of services to our drivers. It's unlikely that we'll have battery electric buses in place by the time we would need to re-up our contract, so it's not in our current contract, but if we were to move in this direction, it's something that needs to be included going forward, definitely.
Do we anticipate that that would increase the cost of our contract?
Additional training, I'm not sure if it would increase additional cost at this time.
Okay, I appreciate that. There's a statement in the plan about additional Class C or Class B certification for CDL drivers, which is not required under our current vehicles. In 2018, the city moved away from the 35-foot pushers because they were riding empty and too expensive.
To my knowledge, we haven't had a discussion about going back to 35-foot buses until tonight. So I guess my question is, considering that the RTC item for later this evening, item 5C, says only 7 of our vehicles have over a 10-year useful life, to me, the fiscal analysis seems like apples to oranges when we're saying our buses are going to last 12 years because most of them don't. And so I guess my question is, are we going back to 35-foot buses as a program? Is that something that we're planning on doing?
As staff, we're not planning on 35-foot buses, which is in large part why we were looking at the standard range 30-foot buses, is because those 35-foot long buses are a little bit longer for navigating some of our streets. And so recently, our last fixed route purchases, those were 28-foot buses, and so that 30-foot range, if they make battery electric, it sort of is in that sweet spot for limiting our size of the bus as well as adhering to something a little bit smaller and more navigating for the city. In terms of commercial driver's licenses, many of our drivers now do have commercial driver's license. I believe 13 do, and many of them also have air brake certifications now as well, which is, I believe, some of the highest numbers that we've seen in years. So many battery electric buses do require air brakes, do have air brakes as well as different manufacturers, and that requires a different commercial driver's license and endorsement. And our drivers have that as well as basic CDL licenses. So that's less of a concern than I think it has been in the past for the city.
I appreciate that. What it says in the plan is that what we have now is Class C, but when you go to the heavier electric vehicles, it's an additional CDL classification that most of our guys don't have.
Correct.
Is that right?
And if they're over the 26,000 weight limit, and the 30-foot standard range buses are not over the 26,000.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful to understand because I think those additional certifications, we would need some sort of sign off from probably Mayor Bagwell or Supervisor Schutte that we would have additional general fund to fund presumably those wages.
It would be the commercial driver's license in particular was something we talked about, and we've talked about with fleet staff as well, not over obligating and committing to requiring a certain type of driver just to drive a transit vehicle. That's an important consideration for sure.
Thanks for humoring me. I have one last question. On CAMPO item 6C tonight, we're learning that Jack can't meet its maintenance targets for getting our vehicles in on time. How often do these vehicles need to be seeing the doctor? I didn't see that in the plan.
Yes. So the way that one of the big differences between battery electric buses as opposed to, for example, a conventional diesel bus is a reduction in moving parts based on multiple case studies as well as information from CAMPO's own, Jack's own maintenance records. We have determined that the typical costs of maintaining a battery electric bus are actually considerably lower than generally what is currently being required to maintain Jumper on Carson's fleet. And so there isn't a apples to oranges, there's not an apples to apples hours of downtime that is readily available and applicable. But you can somewhat extrapolate that from the overall per mile costs, where the electric vehicles, again, according to the studies that we looked at for this as part of this plan preparation, they are down less often and require less funding overall.
Like
So-
if the batteries are heavier, do we have to rotate the tires more often? Do we have to add coolant more often? Is there any research on that? Because right now we're not able to get our vehicles in every 4,000 miles. So I'm curious if this buys us more time or if it helps that issue. Do we know? Does anyone know?
Yeah, it helps certainly with brakes. The regenerative braking helps a lot to preserve the brake life of buses. And there is mixed research right now about the tires, which is the other topic. On one hand, the regenerative braking can help to reduce that wear. On the other hand, the weight of the batteries can help to accelerate it. So there's a mixed consensus right now. There's not one clear answer to that question overall.
Thank you.
Wes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really have a question, just a couple of comments. One, the weight of the batteries, so the buses are going to be heavier, putting more wear and tear on the streets, which is going to cost more maintenance for that. A couple of our meetings ago, we had our fire protection districts in to talk about lithium-ion battery fires, and it scares the hell out of me. I think this is a technology that is evolving, but it's not there yet. Putting fire suppression systems in the maintenance facility is one thing. Well, if the bus catches on fire in the street, which it really could, disposal of the batteries is another big issue. There is not a procedure in place now to safely dispose of these batteries. And I had one more point I'm trying to think of. Well, the fire aspect really does scare me. And the most, from the presentation that we received from our fire protection districts, the most vulnerable time is when they're charging. So you're going to put a charger at a bus stop. That just doesn't make much sense to me. So, I mean, yeah, EVs are coming in the future. I get that. You couldn't give me one. You'll never be able to give me one. But I think this is a little premature for this kind of an investment for CAMPO to make, and I won't be supporting this plan. Thank you.
Mr. Dodson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comment goes back to something that Lucia brought up, was about the comparison to the 35-foot diesel bus replacements. And we haven't been doing that, as you indicated, Chris. So that somewhat skews the financial analysis, because the 28-foot buses that we've been purchasing are considerably cheaper than the 35-foot diesel buses. So, you know, the comparison again wouldn't catch up as quickly in that financial analysis. Would you agree with that?
So for the total cost analysis, we were looking at the purchase price for 30-foot diesel pushers, not the most recent purchase costs of 35-footers that may have been purchased by Jump Around Carson in the past. Additionally, when we looked at the maintenance costs under that analysis, I believe that we used the industry standard maintenance costs for the diesel buses, which are actually a little lower than the average that CAMPO's maintenance has had to keep those up and running. So for the financial side of things, I think I understand your question correctly, Commissioner. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe it is actually an apples to apples comparison in the plan as presented.
Okay, well, I would ask you to maybe take a look at that, because I don't think the cost of the 28-foot bus that we've been buying and replacing the 35-footers with is around $500,000. I think it's considerably less. I just ask you to take a look at that. It's disappointing that and I agree with the comments about the evolving technology. It's, you know, it certainly appears like there are some rapid changes that take place, and that it's too bad that the technology, like for the paratransit fleet, you know, hasn't caught up with even where we are with the pusher buses. So that would lead me back to the question of, you know, what are we looking for in terms of a recommendation here from the board? A little confused. And, you know, it's scary to think about, you know, recognizing what you all were saying about the problems with coming up with the local match on all these things, to commit to more of that, you know, is something that I'm not sure we have the authority to do that. And just wondering about the overall recommendation, although I would add that the report, you know, is very well done. A lot of great information in there, and understanding the benefits that you're pointing out, certainly have no argument with that. But there are issues with moving forward with this proposal, I think.
If I may, Madam Chair, unless.
Yes, certainly, Chris.
I appreciate the comments, and, you know, the battery recycling is definitely an excellent thing that, you know, is a larger concern, not only for Jump Around Carson, but for any electric vehicle at any agency, at any department, purchased for any reason. That's a problem nationwide that we, you know, I'm sure people are working on. I don't have those solutions, but I'm sure there are solutions out there. Redwood Materials and others I know are working on that for companies. In terms of what we do with this plan and where we go from here, it's, you know, it's fortunate in a way that we have this plan because this plan can help us inform our update to our coordinated human services plan, which includes, you know, long range and short range vision for Jump Around Carson as part of the RTP update. So this plan can provide some guidance to update that plan. What does the public want? Where do we go on facility upgrades? What are those things that we want to prioritize going forward as well? Furthermore, I think the conversation has really helped kind of guide me in understanding, you know, what are those bus purchases? What should we be purchasing? I will say there are times on occasion where we do need more seating capacity than we have in our 28-foot buses. We occasionally, those larger pushers with those seating capacities are needed out on some of our routes. Not very often, but occasionally they are. I'll also note that the 28-foot purchase that we made most recently, those buses could probably be a little bit better. There are some challenges with those that we're running into the longer we run, and so we've been looking at other manufacturers that make similar or other type of buses. For instance, recently we had one of the new Gilligs come down, Gillig manufactured buses, diesel pusher, 30-foot long from TTD, they were recently purchased, came down, and we came to Carson City, our fleet maintenance staff got a tour. TTD had staff down describing how it works, how it operates. We ran it to our drivers. They got a chance to tour it and review its features, and you know, a lot of positive feedback. And TTD has positive feedback for the way those buses operate. So understanding the different manufacturers and different types of vehicles is something that I know I've been looking at and figuring out. Okay, if we want to pursue the cutaway 28-foot cutaway buses, that's certainly still an option. We'll have to procure those. We could join another state contract, such as the state of Washington, and piggyback to purchase Gillig buses, similar to what TTD does. And they make a variety of manufacturers. And there are other states. Arizona has another manufacturer of buses. So what I'm hearing is, just kind of a summary of, we're not sure our vehicle sizes, we're not sure our vehicle types, and I think that's a larger discussion as part of the RTC as to what does our vehicle fleet look like going forward. And we can do that as a separate item, or we can do that as part of an update to the Coordinated Human Services Plan, because it is part of the rider experience for what type of bus they're willing to get on, want to get on, what they enjoy getting on, fuel and styling, if you will. I think this plan overall really provides a lot of information, has been noted by many of you, of information that we didn't have before we did this plan. The fire suppression issues, the maintenance issues, the weights of the vehicles. I think there's a lot of stuff in this plan that, even without a timeline, are incredibly valuable to answering the question of, well, is this even a thing we should be considering? And so whether you all decide to accept or approve the plan or not, I think the plan provides clarification to what it is that we can do or can't do here in the CAMPO Carson City area, and a possible scenario that if we wanted to move in battery electric buses in the future, now or in the future, we have the framework to do that. So I would just recommend to all of you to just, if that's something to keep in mind about, we don't have to be held to this timeline. We can work with CDM Smith potentially to adjust that timeline or soften those recommendations, but at least we have this as a plan that we can use going forward. So that's overall, I think, if I could sum up some of the comments I've heard tonight from all of you.
Mr. Henderson.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I remember the last point I wanted to make. During the presentation that we had from the fire protection, one of the things they brought up was battery life. Because the example given was a Tesla battery, and they usually last about 8 or 9 years. And then you got to replace it, and those are not cheap. So that's just something else to keep in mind before you go full force into EVs. Thank you.
Ms. Schutte.
Yeah, can you we've spoken a lot about the battery electric buses. How does that compare with the diesel hybrid regarding, because that seems like a potential middle ground?
Thank you. Yeah, we actually included in the zero emission transition plan, recognizing that there could be concerns over potential lithium fires, over concerns over reliability, any number of different concerns. We have some alternative implementation approaches that we identified in the plan, and one of those is the use of diesel-electric hybrid buses. These are non-plug-in vehicles. They have a pretty small battery, order of magnitude smaller than you would expect on a full battery electric bus. And the big benefit to those is they have significantly reduced fuel costs as compared to conventional diesel buses. They don't obtain all of the co-benefits that we were talking about earlier. They don't reduce emissions as much, and they do. There's no real opportunity for infrastructure sharing with other transit agencies in the region, but they do make a lot of economic sense, and they're a really effective stopgap measure, or not even stopgap, but first step measure if there is a concern over, or if the concerns over battery electrics are just too great to overlook at this point.
Is that it? Oh, you got more, Ms. Schutte?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks.
I think what I'd like to do is, do I have any public comment on this item? Let me just do a little bit of public comment, so then we can bring it back up here to wrap this item. Mr. French?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Denny French, Carson City. Gosh, I appreciate the comments, the questions, very in-depth. I appreciate all of those because I think that's where we're really starting. We need to cover and satisfy those answers, I feel, in more depth. I think the basic suggestions are great. China's dealing with what they call a solid state lithium battery. Its capacity is greater. Its distance that it can go on those full capacities is greater. However, the weight is greater. It has less vulnerability to fire and water. It doesn't have to have the same cooling systems in some ways. Not that you can get away from that consideration wherever you park these suckers. They had them at the VA for a while, and they parked them out in an open area when they had the charging. Chargers were a little too close, and those were mobile chargers. They had those so that they could separate those places to different areas and such. And they were next to a unit that's a 2-story parking stall, and I haven't seen them there. The last time I was there, it could have been that I was too occupied with my own issues, but I think that there are considerations about the cars on the other side that were parked in that unit and the heat that they were maintaining. We have had 2 record hot years this time around, and the heat is a real vulnerability to the lithium batteries and the state that they're in. The new technology on diesel fuel is changing. It's getting as clean almost as some of the jet fuels are now. Some of the fuels are so clean, they have issues with them being so clean. But I loaded up, I pumped, I don't know how many hundreds of gallons of fuel as I worked at transportation in Pomona. And I literally can't deal with the toxicity of diesel fuel. So that had me having to make some changes in my career choice, or at least a step up as far as the mechanical aspects of it. So I really think this is a great start, but I don't think we should move it on other than just to go deeper in what we already have noticed. We have some holes in the understanding. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do I have any other public comment? Okay, then I'm going to bring it back up here for maybe some final discussions or some thoughts. And so the objective of the plan itself was to lay out what a scenario looked like in Carson City to be able to use low emission, no emission. And I think that the plan meets that goal. So, right, so I look at it as two component parts. So one, there's a difference to me in wording potentially, and I just throw that out there, that one, you can accept a plan which says that the vendor did indeed deliver and do what we asked them to do, but I'm not going to approve the plan for final implementation because I think we as a group want to know when the date is and when some deeper discussions like, wait a second, until we have a battery solve, potentially, we wouldn't implement. And so I to discuss whether this is really a two-stage for the CAMPO board, is to say we could accept the report and indicate that the vendor has indeed delivered and done their project as requested, but that we wait for the approval of implementation of the plan until some of our other questions are answered or some of our other concerns can be met. Because the only other purpose of this is to move us into a different funding scheme, right? It lets us access other potential dollars. It doesn't stop us from accessing dollars that are in our current diesel, right? So we as CAMPO or Jack or anything else, we're not losing abilities. We just aren't maybe going to access some additional things. And so I wonder if that works for us to accept the work of the vendor, but not approve an implementation until it's brought back to us where we feel more comfortable there. Ms. Maloney.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you, Mayor. And I agree with some of the other comments that the report was really well done. It was a really well done report. So I don't want any of my questions to imply otherwise. I like the approach of accepting the plan. Our challenge at CAMPO and with right now our only subrecipient of Jack, we don't lack federal funds. If I'm not mistaken, we're giving funds back to FTA every year because we can't spend them fast enough. So this isn't an issue where we don't have enough funds to operate. It's can we be cleaner? Can we do better? And I think a secondary agenda item like you suggest to work through some of those details to make sure we can maximize the opportunities in a way that makes sense for Carson is a great approach. So good suggestion. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Is that
I've got
a
a question.
plan or an idea that you support?
Oh, yeah, no, your approach was excellent. I was just trying to clarify in the overall time frame. Has this been submitted to FTA or it only goes to those if we approve the implementation of the plan?
Thank you, Commissioner Novak. Chris Martinovich. My understanding is when you apply for, well, two answers to that. The first answer is we will upload to our FTA grant management system as it's an agency document. Secondly, when we apply for, should we apply for a Section 5339C, we would include this as the requirement to apply for those as part of those documents. So it hasn't been submitted. There's no formal approval process from the FTA for this plan. It's just used as part of grant applications.
And just for clarity, so unless we authorize the application for those funds, then we would at the same time then approve this plan or maybe small adjustments to this plan,
Yeah,
like implementation dates, things that we would come through here and potentially update.
correct. Section 5339C is a discretionary grant program, so
So
it's
you have
not
to
an
get permission.
apportionment. So we would have to come to the RTC, I believe, for the requesting of those funds. And then this plan would go with that. And I believe diesel hybrid, in order to be eligible to receive 5339C funds of any type, diesel hybrid included, we would need this plan as well. So it's all together.
So my idea actually can work and we can bring the agenda item for approval at any time that we're wanting to access 5339C funds. So if we're giving you an authorization under that granting source, then we could turn this into an approval. And I'm assuming let me just ask another, it's not ridiculous question. Once we accept this plan, we can ourselves make the small tweaks for implementation dates and things necessary. It becomes ours, correct? It's not, you're delivering it to us, then it's ours. Okay. You see where I'm going with that? I don't want you to turn around and say, oh, you owe me 100,000 because you changed it to 32-foot or 28-foot bus or whatever. We're going to just have a phase 1 instead of a phase 1 and 2 because we're far enough in that we're just going to start authorizing 30-foot buses. I mean, those are the only kind of small changes that I see us looking at and really finding out for me where we can put the batteries. I think I'm as concerned about that as anything else, right?
Yeah.
Where are we putting
Brian
the
Stewart,
batteries?
thank you for the question, but yeah,
Thank you.
this is your plan.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
You manage it the way
It's
you need.
important for me to put it on a record and not find out, uh-oh, we did that wrong. Okay, Ms. Schutte.
Well, I like the plan because it's also, there's a lot of considerations that are coming to the forefront. You know, I like the idea of the battery electric buses, but that charging, that at this point, I don't see it as something that could work. You know, our bus routes are hourly. And so then to take out 15 minutes of that, now we're interfering with the schedule. And so that's just one complication as well as some of the other concerns. I love, though, the direction this is going because I appreciate being mindful of reducing pollutants, particulate matter, all of those things that, the noise from diesel, all of that. So I would love to learn more about the hybrid diesel. I think that is perhaps the next logical step. But before we can make that decision, I think there's a lot more that we need to look into.
So with that, are we good with a motion to accept the plan? Somebody want to make a motion? Ms. Maloney?
Move to accept the zero emission transition plan as presented.
I will second.
I have a motion and a second for acceptance of the plan. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no.
No.
No. Let the record reflect it was 1 no by Mr. Henderson. Thank you all again for a good job, and it's well on its way to, I think somebody's going to come up with a great plan, and maybe I just have a little tiny bitter pill because of serving on TDD. But again, a lot of push to do to accomplish something, and then it's going to come out wrong. But it didn't go so good. So, right? And then what are you doing now with buses that you can't utilize? So, perfect. Thank you again for your good work and stuff.
Thanks very
Okay.
much.
Is everybody okay, or can we take a brief, do you need a brief recess? Everybody good? Keep
Madam Mayor?
flowing on? Okay.
Madam Chair, I just want to let you know, we just lost connection through Granicus.
So we're not recording now?
Oh, we are recording audio. I don't
Okay.
know. I have to check with Keith on video.
Okay, just no video, but we still have legal audio.
Oh, I don't know that we might have video. My system just died.
Okay, as long as we have the legal recording, we're good to go. That's all I need to make sure is we're legally recording this, because that's what you're required by law to have. Not that you don't want to see our pretty faces, but those aren't required. So yes, you're checking to see that we have a recording? Just double check we have a recording, because we might be taking a recess after all.
Mine blew up, so I don't know.
Gosh, and you tried to be Brittany. What happened there? She's getting kicked out no matter what. Video's down, but we have recording. No, recording.
So YouTube. We have video on YouTube, but not on Granite.
Okay, so we have a recording then. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, then we're going to move to agenda item 6B, discussion and possible action regarding revisions to the CAMPO policies and procedures. Ms. Schutte, may I have your disclosure, please?
Yes, NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose conflicts of interest and abstain from voting when I have a disqualifying conflict. My nephew is Chris Martinovich, who is employed by Carson City and will be presenting this item. Chris and I are not receiving compensation of any kind directly related to this item. It will not foreseeably impair or enhance the terms of his service with the city, and we are not affected by the outcome of this item to a greater degree than any other resident of Carson City. NRS 281A.420 only requires abstention in clear cases, and the independent judgment of a reasonable person in my position would not be impacted by my familial relationship. Therefore, I do not have a disqualifying conflict and will be voting on this matter.
Thank you. Mr. Martinovich, a briefing, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Martinovich, Transportation Manager. This item is to amend CAMPO's policies and procedures, which are essentially, the kind of the governing guidance documents for the Carson area MPO. These revisions the primary section of the revisions were made to appendices B and C, which are the procurement procedures. The procurement procedure amendments specifically to Appendix C, which are the FTA procurement procedures, were necessitated primarily by the recent training review completed by the FTA of CAMPO, whereby a few federal clauses were missing on a couple of different procurements. And so the revisions to the FTA policy and procurement policy in Appendix C account for and address those deficiencies that were noted. At the same time, since we had the opportunity to amend the policy, we went ahead and included a section, Appendix B, which is our Federal Highway Administration procurement policies, which have long had various policies for the city with NDOT primarily, and so we've just formalized and provided a single reference document so that CAMPO staff as well as partner agency staff can use this as an initial resource to understand federal procurement processes, especially administered through CAMPO. In addition to those revisions, other revisions to the policies were made related to the terms of CAMPO members, election of the chair and vice chair, and various other elements, including clarification of the role of the transportation manager. This one in particular, which is listed under Section 5.1 on 122, came about through discussions with the FTA on, well, who are you to say you're the accountable executive? Well, we just decided, let's just put this in writing, get it formalized so that there isn't that question going forward about whose authority is what. And they had a lot of questions about that during the triennial review, which we can discuss on the next item. But that's the high-level summary of the revisions to the CAMPO policies and procedures. Once approved, we'll finalize this and it'll be submitted as part of our FTA triennial. But I'm happy to take questions on this one.
Does any member have a question? Ms. Maloney?
I was just curious, on the amendment to section 2.3, where did the 12 years come from?
The 12 years mirrors Carson City's board and commission policy.
Thank you.
And it's also elected officials, same answer for elected officials, which is where the Carson City Board of Supervisors picked 12 years to put in the boards and commission policy, because it's the same as the elected officials get 12 years. So if you're wondering where, like you said, where it all came from. Anybody else have any questions? Nothing? Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, I'll bring it back up here for a motion then. Mr. Dodson?
I move to approve the revisions to the CAMPO's policies and procedures as presented.
I second.
Have a motion and a second for approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. We're now going to move to agenda item 6C, which is discussion and presentation on the final report for fiscal year 2024 Federal Transit Administration Triennial Review of CAMPO. Mr. Martinovich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Martinovich, Transportation Manager. I first wanted to acknowledge that those of you who are familiar, I know Commissioner Maloney is, with the effort associated with a training review is exhaustive. And so I just want to do a shout out to Rebecca Bustos, who really led the effort initially back in January, is when we started pulling together the documents and submitted all of them to the FTA at the end of February. So this is a long process to do a training review, and a lot of effort from a variety of staff into that. Attached to this in the exhibit is the report delivered from the FTA's consultant on the triennial review. A formal review was conducted in person in June of 2024 after submitting all of our documents. They reviewed 23 different program areas. Across those 23 areas, some of them don't apply to us, but the majority do. They found 2 deficiencies, one in the area of maintenance, deficiency of unable to keep up with our preventative maintenance schedule of 4,000 miles. And the second one was in procurement, specifically missing federal clauses on their selected review of procurements. There are corrective actions required for some of these. The deficiency related to procurement has been addressed as approved by the CAMPO policies and procedures, and so the revised policies and procedures will be presented and provided through the FTA's OTRAC online system. I'll be submitting that before the deadline of here coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll submit it probably tomorrow or the day after. The other deficiency in the area of maintenance will be addressed during the Regional Transportation Commission meeting by revising the Jack Transit's Transit Asset Management Plan and Carson City's Transit Maintenance Plan to revise the period of preventative maintenance from 4,000 miles to 5,000 miles, and I'll discuss those items when we get to that item at the RTC, and unless you'd like me to go into that now, happy to do that. Otherwise, that's the report. We'll look forward potentially to doing this again in 2027. I will note that the discussions that were held with the FTA and the FTA's consultants were really interesting. A lot of good guidance, a lot of good best practices on, have you considered doing this? Have you considered doing that? And so we've made some other tweaks, and there'll be more items over the course of the year to make sure we don't have any future findings in any of our program areas. So I will note that one of the reviewers worked at Eau Claire, Wisconsin. She was a transit manager essentially for the transit agency in Wisconsin there. And she noted that she'd been through a number of these training reviews, and it was her final one after 26 years of service where she got 0 findings. But every other one that she'd been through, she had findings. So it's not uncommon to have findings. But I'm proud of the staff and the work that we've done to be able to continue to make improvements in the area of managing our transit grants. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member have a comment? It's a non-action item, so any comments? Ms. Maloney?
Chris, you and your staff know so much and handle so many different components with hardly any support from any other department in the city. Good job.
Thank you.
It's a tough one. Having no deficiencies, if they review, well, if you review thousands of lines, it's like you said, good luck to anyone to think they never make a mistake. So really well done. Okay, so we have no public needed on that as it's a non-action item. So we'll go to agenda item 6D. Again, this is a discussion and presentation of our 2024 Transportation Network Monitoring Report. Ms. Norman, this one's for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kelly Norman, Senior Transportation Planner. So the 2024 Transportation Network Monitoring Report reflects the who, what, where, and how people move in and through the Campo region. The total population of Campo, according to the 2022 census, which is the latest data, is 89,149 people. Over the last year, the largest population growth has been seen in tracts 2, 3, and 8 in Carson City. So tracts 2, 3, and 8 here. And tracts 9603 in Dayton, in Lyon County, and tract 22 down in the Johnson Lane area of Douglas County. So up on the screen are population pyramids reflecting the sex and ages of the Campo population. Very generally, there are 3 basic shapes regularly seen within population pyramids. There's the expansive pyramid, which is the triangle shape, which represents a growing population with many, many births and also many deaths. There's a constrictive population pyramid, which have low mortality rates with consistent fertility rates. And this is quite like what is seen in 2012 with a little bulge in the middle. The third type is called stationary and resembles more of a column shape. The 2022 population pyramid has characteristics resembling both this constrictive population, where we can see the bulge aging 10 years up, and more straighter, reflecting lower birth and death rates. The percentage of the Hispanic population within the region is at its highest point in the last 10 years, comprising 22% of Campo population. And from the state demographer population projections, we know that this population will continue to grow throughout the region. Staff continue to improve on our community outreach efforts and to facilitate effective, equitable community outreach. It's vital to ensure that engagement strategies include translated materials and partnerships with local Hispanic community groups and an understanding of how best to collaborate with stakeholders from this community. This slide reflects the households within Campo. The different bars indicate different income groups, and the line along the top indicates households. So in the 2025 column, or in the 2012 column, there were many more households making less than $50,000 and many less households making more than $100,000. In 2022, there are many less households making $50,000 and many more households making more than $100,000. 34% of the households are non-family, meaning they live with someone they're not related or married to, and 66% are considered family households. 24% of households have children, and 76% of households do not have children within Campo. 31% of households have someone receiving retirement income, almost a third. Transportation safety is a priority for Campo, and we've talked about it a lot recently with the Local Road Safety Plan and the US 50 East Carson Complete Streets Corridor Study. The preliminary 2023 data received from NDOT shows a reduction in both the fatality and serious injury rates for Campo. However, if you look on packet page 213, the raw numbers of fatalities and serious injuries and non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries are still high. Transportation safety is an ongoing effort, and staff are consistent in including safety improvements within as many projects as possible. The average PCI after the last pavement survey for road conditions within Carson City was 49. CAMPO staff is working with Applied Pavement Technology on an updated pavement survey. They're doing great. We had a public outreach event a couple Fridays ago. We got some public. He was very into the technology, and it was a lot of fun. And they're doing great on the survey. I think they may be complete, but as the last time we talked, they were still doing Douglas County. So in the next few slides, I'll show you the simulated progression of housing units, which you'll see on this screen, which is employment. This slide is actually the housing units for the years 2022, 2030, 2050. Most of the board has seen these before with the years 2020, 2030, and 2050. These are from the updated travel demand model. So you see the housing units growing over these 3 years in North Carson, at the border of Carson and Douglas, and in Dayton. These 3 maps detail where employment is predicted to grow in CAMPO. So there's growth in North and Central Carson City, some in Lyon, and a couple areas within the Douglas portion of CAMPO, south near the Johnson Lane area. So these maps show the level of service changing through the 3 years, 2022, 2030, and 2050. By 2030, both US 50 and US 395 become impacted by the growth of drivers expected along these corridors. The US 395 study is in its final draft by NDOT and addresses some of these concerns. The US 50 Complete Street Study is also addressing some of these concerns. It's important to look at alternatives such as carpooling, expanded or creative transit operations between Lyon County and Carson City, or possibly alternative routes. Safety, again, will continue to be an issue along both of these busy and important roadways. This graph shows the number of households along the top line, and the bars show the number of cars per household from 2012 to 2022. The number of zero-car households remains the same from 2012 to 2022 at about 5%. Most households have 2 cars. The number of households with 4 or more cars has increased from 7.7% in 2012 to 12.5% in 2022.
It doesn't even make any sense.
The commute for
Bigger
CAMPO
household.
residents continues to get longer each year. In 2012, the commute was 19.7 minutes. In 2022, the average is 22.8 minutes. The next series of maps and graphs comes from the Census on the Map tool. And this latest Census on the Map data is from 2021. So this graph shows you in the middle green circle, this is the number of people living and working within the CAMPO boundaries. So there are 18,000 of the population of CAMPO. There are 18,994 people who live and work within CAMPO. The green arrow on the left, the 15,315, these are the people who commute to CAMPO for work from outside of CAMPO. And then the light green arrow on the right shows the 20,174 people who live within CAMPO but commute outside CAMPO to work. And then we'll go a little bit deeper to understand where CAMPO workers live and where CAMPO residents work. So this is where CAMPO workers reside. The This yellow beige color represents Carson City. The next highest is from Reno. And then we have workers from Dayton, Sparks, Indian Hills, Gardnerville, Johnson Lane. This graph shows where people working within the CAMPO boundary live. Most people live within Carson City. And then the next highest is Reno, Dayton, Sparks. Oh, sorry. This map shows where Carson City residents are employed. There are clusters within CAMPO. There's a big one in Carson City. There's another large one in Dayton. And outside the CAMPO boundary, there are some clusters in Douglas County and Tahoe, in the Reno Sparks area, also in Story County and in Yerington.
So if I understand, let me understand this right. So 3,806 CAMPO residents commute more than 50 miles to work. Am I reading this correctly?
3,806 people commute greater than 50 miles to work.
Wow, 9.7%. That's surprised me that they're going that far. Okay, thanks.
This map on the left shows where CAMPO workers live. Again, there are clusters within the CAMPO region, but CAMPO workers commute from Reno Sparks, from Gardnerville and Douglas County, some from Tahoe, and some further east from in Lyon County. And the radar graph on the right shows the distance and direction the CAMPO workers are traveling to and from their home. There's a large number that travel less than 10 miles, but there's a big contingent of people traveling north or traveling south or traveling northeast back home. This pie chart shows the commute modes for people from 2012 to 2022. We can see that there's a small percentage of people traveling, there's a little bit less percentage of people traveling alone to work, 83% in 2012 to 2022, 77% in 2022. Carpooling is up 2 percentage points. The work at home options have increased 5 percentage points within the last 10 years and probably accounts for the numbers, the decrease in the drive alone numbers. This graph shows pedestrian volumes on the 4 complete streets corridors, the downtown, North Carson, South Carson, and William Street. Downtown and North Carson have the most foot traffic. Staff have been working over the years to improve pedestrian and bicycle count procedures, and in the downtown and South Carson locations now have permanent counters that continually count pedestrians and bicyclists. And then permanent counters are planned for both the East William and North Carson streets after their planned reconstructions. Bicycle counts have always been difficult for CAMPO staff to accurately calculate. The bike counts along South Carson have been pretty consistent. Staff have seen growth in the amount of cyclists riding along the new multi-use path. The new counters installed in both downtown and South Carson collect both the bicycle and the pedestrian counts. This graph shows Jack ridership data over the years 2013 through 2023. Ridership has increased a little bit since 2021, but it's still not back to that 2018 record high. Public outreach has always been an important CAMPO staff goal. Since the public participation plan was approved in 2023, CAMPO staff has made a concerted effort to both extend public outreach and record those efforts. So here's a short list of accomplishments in public outreach in the last year, and CAMPO staff continue to monitor this and seek to improve it in the coming year. CAMPO staff will be busy in the next year, so stay tuned for more updates, including the CAMPO RTP 2050 update, the Jack Coordinated Human Services Plan, the North Carson Complete Streets Feasibility Study, and then the completion of the second phase of the US 50 East Carson Complete Streets Study. Again, we will continue to emphasize and encourage safety in both planning and projects and emphasize public outreach. Yep. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Again, it's a non-action item, but does anyone have any thoughts? Ms. Maloney?
Thank you. Going back to slide 21, Kelly, when we approved the updated public participation plan recently, there was a metric that we talked about, and I had asked a question back then that talked about attendance at meetings. Is that on here somewhere, or have we started tracking that? Do you remember that?
I do not have that data.
Okay. I want to make sure that when we're doing these reports, that all the performance measures that we have in our plans that we say we're going to track, then we're tracking. That was my comment when we approved that plan, to make sure we could track all the things. Sorry, that's totally fine and it's new. So, and then my second question had to do with slide 10. And I was curious if staff could provide a summary of could you go back to slide 10, sorry. With the updated travel demand model, I assume since the updated, and maybe this is a question for Chris, with the updated travel demand model, we started that work before the Carson City started doing the new land use maps for the master plan. Is that right?
That's true.
How did these forecasts change when we input the new land use maps for the Carson City master plan update? How did it change the traffic? Have we ran those scenarios?
We have not run those scenarios yet.
Because we haven't adopted yet.
Okay. Can I have my comment and the response be included in the minutes of this meeting, that scenario has never been run for the Carson City master plan update? Thank you.
What is the actual point? I want to make sure that we're all clear. What are you indicating that the?
Well, I think
try to get us to what your concern or issue or what you're trying to.
Well, it's not relevant for this board, but for the board of supervisors that is considering adopting the master plan and the land use maps, there are findings that have to be made related to traffic impact. And it sounds like staff is saying that we haven't analyzed the traffic impact.
Oh, yeah, we won't do that till we bring master plan
And the land use
scenarios, so they're, right, okay,
right?
that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I was like, wait, what's this for this? Okay, two different issues, okay, thank you. Anybody else have any? Nope. Okay, this is again a non-action item, so we will move on to agenda item 6E. We had a busy night tonight. Discussion and possible action regarding the interlocal agreement between CAMPO, Clark County, Department of Aviation, Nevada Department of Transportation, Reno Tahoe Airport Authority, Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, and Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County concerning CAMPO's participation in the Nevada Unified Certification Program, which certifies businesses under the Nevada's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, authorization for the transportation manager and district attorney's office to approve changes proposed by other parties to the agreement that do not substantively modify Campo's rights and obligations under the agreement and authorize the transportation manager to sign the agreement and future amendments to the agreement. We might talk about that, future agreement. May I have your disclosure, Ms. Schutte?
Yes, my nephew Chris Martinovich is the city staff presenter on this item. My disclosure and analysis from item 6B applies here as well. Chris and I are not receiving compensation of any kind directly related to this item. It will not foreseeably impair or enhance the terms of his city service, and we are not affected by the outcome of this item to a greater degree than any other Carson City resident. Therefore, I have no disqualifying conflict, and I will be voting.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Martinovich, a briefing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Martinovich. As noted in the staff report, this item is regarding an amendment to Nevada's Unified Certification Program, or NUCP. This program is the program that, as noted, certifies disadvantaged business enterprises, or DBEs, in the state of Nevada for both airport operations and transportation operations. And CAMPO and the Regional Transportation Commission both commonly do have DBE goals on their projects, and so we select firms, or firms propose on our projects from the disadvantaged business enterprise list as approved by staff in here. This committee, the committee has been in existence for a long time. CAMPO has been a member of the committee since 2011 and has been participating on the monthly meetings to this point. Traditionally, the transit coordinators have been doing that, but I've been attending the meetings more recently. The amendments to the agreement are necessitated by revisions from the USDOT related to the DBE program at a federal level, and including new areas related to concessionaires, small business concessionaires for certain classifications. And so this agreement is being amended to account for that new classification category. In addition to that, the agreement also revises sections related to how often the committee meets and the way the committee is approving DBEs in the state. It's giving authorization. The committee is essentially giving authorization to the agencies to approve those DBEs upon their review. There is no statutory requirement from the feds to have a committee approve them. The agencies can do that, and so that was an extra step. I'm assuming that was an extra step that the committee was doing through that approval process. So by eliminating that requirement, the committee is moving to monthly meetings to get a review of those that were certified over that period of time and provide general program guidance going forward. With that, I'm happy to answer questions. I will say that we asked for clarification to work with the staff and the district attorney's office because we're working with all the other agencies who are parties to this agreement on final revisions. The revision that you do see in front of you as part of this exhibit is the revision that we've provided with our comments and provided and incorporated in, and it's been provided to the agencies for their review, but I haven't received feedback on if those were good or bad or one way or the other. So that's where we are on this one. Happy to take questions.
So, Chris, one of the things for the possible action deals with a little bit more, the way I read it. I don't have any issue with minor, non-substantive changes being done by the district attorney's office and by you. That's something typically we do to do all these types of agreements. But it also says, and future amendments. And so I'm not interested in allowing you the authority to do an amendment that's substantive, because it's, right? So I think definitionally, I just want to say, I don't have any problem with you doing the non-substantive, but anything else needs to come back to this board, because we determine that, nope, we're going to do it on our own, or we're not going to do them. So if that's all right, or anybody else,
Easy.
Plus, if I let you do them all, then I don't know what's going on. It's the only way I keep myself current on the rules is to read. So anybody else have anything, other comment on this one? Okay, this one does have action, so is there any public comment? Okay, so I'm willing to accept a motion, and we just strike the "and future amendments" off the end of the motion. So does somebody want to make that?
Sure.
Shooty.
I move to approve the agreement to authorize the Transportation Manager and District Attorney's Office to approve proposed changes that do not substantively modify CAMPO's rights and obligations under the agreement, and to authorize the Transportation Manager to sign the agreement.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect that was unanimous. We're now on to agenda item 7A. Mr. Martinovich, a report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Nothing left? Oh.
A couple of items I wanted to acknowledge. Staff has been attending this week the Nevada Traffic Safety Summit. Kelly Norman, Jared Cragen, and Casey Sylvester have been attending that this week. Kelly's been on a number of panels and discussion groups, so it's really good to see our staff out there and engaging in safety as a region, as was evident by our proclamation today. So excellent, and thank you. Thanks to them for attending. Pavement survey, Kelly also mentioned the pavement survey was supposed to be complete, I believe, as of today. They had finished Carson City at the last time we had met, and they were completing Douglas County's survey. So the next step is the data collection and analysis. Data collection is complete, so the next part is the data analysis section, which will take several months for them to process the data on all the streets and provide that updated PCI map that we're all so familiar with. So that's still in progress and on schedule. The weather was not a hindrance, which was wonderful. Staff have released a request for proposals for updating CAMPO's regional transportation plan and Jack's coordinated human services plan. We did that together because of the togetherness of the public outreach and the coordination between the two plans, a lot of cohesive, a lot of similarities. So we're looking to get some support to do that. It'll be sort of a even lift between CAMPO staff as well as consultant staff just to get help with things like outreach and data collection and things like that. So looking to get that going after the start of the new year. Do want to note that the FTA in late April, or maybe it was, I think it was late April, issued General Directive 24-1, which deals with assaults on transit workers. Over the last couple of months, I've been working with First Transit to document any assaults that we have on transit workers. The directive indicates that we have to provide FTA a summary of any assaults that we have had and mitigations to processes to mitigate those and implementation steps in terms of what those mitigations are. We're working through those. We'll be submitting that to the FTA ahead of their required deadline, which is December 26th, I believe. And so that task is generally complete. I'll have more to say on that during the Regional Transportation Commission meeting in December when we talk about Public Transit Agency Safety Plan. But I wanted to notify all of you and let you all know that there's a lot of focus right now on transit worker safety, and so the FTA has asked for some additional information on that. I also wanted to note that December 2nd through the 6th is Older Driver Safety Awareness Week. We are coordinating with the local sheriff's department as well as Safe Routes to School to provide some educational outreach opportunities for many of our older drivers. In the CAMPO region, as was evident by our monitoring report, seeing the age getting a little higher, thought we'd take this opportunity to partner with some of our agencies and just be out there and provide any updated resources for those older drivers. So look for that. We're working with some different potentially community outreach activities at the Senior Center. That concludes item 7A. I think I got my numbers right this meeting.
There you go. Yeah, we'll move on to agenda item 7B.
I have on this one, next month items, we plan to bring forward the TIP adoption, the next 4-year adoption of the TIP, as well as the annual obligation report for CAMPO. Those are the 2 items we have on the agenda for sure.
Does any members of the board have anything to share or notes? No? Okay, we're done with 7B. We are on final public comment for the CAMPO. Do I have any final public comment? Okay, seeing that, we are adjourned as CAMPO, and those of us that are RTC will come back in 5 minutes. We will take a small recess here. Transportation Commission to order. Miss Warren, may I have a roll call, please?
Chair Bagwell,
Here.
Vice Chair Schutte,
Here,
Commissioner Dodson,
Here.
Commissioner Maloney, Commissioner Novak. We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. We're now on to our opening public comment. Do I have any opening public comment for RTC? Mr. French?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners and Supervisor. Denny French, Carson City, Nevada, and I missed an opportunity earlier, but I hope that you will consider this in the range of considerated traffic flow and such like that, to know that the Northern Nevada Wildlife Draft Connectivity Plan is coming into being, and they're working on it, and they'll be working on it for quite a while till they figure out where the overpasses, underpasses, and such to allow for habitat fragmentation will also be brought during that time. So any moves that we make towards where we're putting things has that to consider. I just also want to say how much I appreciate the buses. I do feel that the pressure to get to one place to another is wore on one particular driver, and I felt bad for him because I know he was tired, but he expressed some of his frustration with traffic in front of him. In fact, honked at the person without realizing the person was stopped for pedestrian. So I know that they're good drivers. I've ridden the bus enough to have experienced some close calls, and they really, especially John, he's passed, but he had twice people just pull things that would have had all of us in great danger were his reflex not as good as they were. So I just want to applaud all the drivers personally and thank them for their patience. And if you're getting burned out, take a break, you know? Thank you.
Please. Mr. Martinovich?
Chris Martinovich, Carson City. I wanted to take a moment in public comment and recognize one of First Transit's employees, Mark Mejia. He recently was driving one of our buses down the road, and on the side of the road, he noticed that the fence had been damaged, and he circled around, and to make a long story short, he pulled off the side of the road and noticed a vehicle had careened off the side of the road into a ditch down the other side and up an embankment. And Mark, being the person that he is, immediately stopped the bus, got out there, went out for a check on the person, and fortunately the person ended up being okay. But I just wanted to publicly recognize Mark for his service to the community and for the great job he does, not only for Jump Around Carson, but to all of us here in Carson City. So just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Hey. Yay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, do I have any other public comment? All right, and I'll come to agenda item 4A. Do I have any corrections or updates for the minutes? If not, I will accept a motion then for approval. Mr. Dodson, you're up.
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
I second.
I have a motion and a second for approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. We're now on to agenda item 5A, discussion and possible action regarding the College Parkway pedestrian safety project, including possible recommendations to pursue specific projects and improve pedestrian safety at various intersections along College Parkway and Fairview Drive. Casey, are you going to take us through this one? Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks. Casey, push your button to make sure you're green. Okay.
Thank you.
And move it closer. If you pull it up, we can hear.
I think we'll make it work. Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Casey Sylvester, Transportation and Traffic Engineer. Right, we're going to go over the proposed safety projects on College Parkway and Fairview Drive. Staff evaluated unsignalized intersections in Carson City with an emphasis on crash severity, vulnerable users, and on low-cost, high-value improvements. Crash severity is how much impact will the incident have on people. This rating is determined by level of injury or no injury. So there's what's called a CABCO scale as an ABC level of rating for injuries, where A is most severe, B is somewhat severe, and C is minor, and then K for fatalities, and O for property damage only. So in this case, a significant crash that the occupant of the vehicle walks away from might be rated low as like a C or an O, depending on the person who's wearing their seatbelt, they're not ejected from the vehicle, anything like that, and they're fine. However, in a different situation, a crash that's low speed seems minor, but the person has significant injury, perhaps a back injury or something of that sort, could be much higher on the rating. So it's based upon the impact of the person, not the impact of the vehicle. So what are vulnerable users? Vulnerable users are road users who are not in a vehicle. If you're in a vehicle, whether it's a modern vehicle with auto braking and things like that, or it's an older vehicle, if you're in the vehicle, you are somewhat protected. Users who are not in the vehicle, whether it's a motorized vehicle or not, if they're not inside of a vehicle, then they're more susceptible to injury. And so they are a vulnerable user. And just as an example of what makes them more vulnerable, if you think about a vehicle colliding with a parked car at, say, 10 miles an hour, it's probably a minor thing. It'll be property damage only in most cases. But in the same case, if a vehicle collides with a pedestrian or a cyclist at 10 miles an hour, talking about potential for some serious injuries, potentially in the B or even in some cases an A scenario. And so that sort of is why they're the vulnerable users.
How come motorcycles aren't part of it? I saw the footnote, but why? Where do motorcycles get counted?
We are focused on non-motorized users because the nature of how they're interacting with cars is different, whereas a motorcycle is in a lane with other vehicles, and these other vulnerable users are usually off-system and crossing, whether that's because they're on a separated bike path or they're on a separated bike lane, or they're on a sidewalk and then they're crossing. And so this analysis was focusing on those users because it's a different nature of changes to accommodate a motorcycle user.
The treatment, you mean, or the application of what you would do is different if it's considering a motorcycle?
Precisely.
Okay.
Thanks for catching that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this evaluation took a systemic approach. Our local road safety plan that we just finished earlier this year is also a systemic approach. This analysis is building upon that. We're doing further analysis, looking a little bit more into different characteristics. In this case, we're looking at road characteristics where the local road safety plan started with crash history. The intersections identified were either initially identified in the LRSP analysis, and then some of them were initially identified but did not make it to the final report, or they have similar crash rates to those that are recognized in the LRSP. So what are the characteristics for increased severity? If you have a wide road, it takes a pedestrian or another vulnerable user a longer time to cross it. It's more dangerous because the pedestrian is facing traffic for a longer period of time. That's called exposure. Of course, roads that have high exposure usually also have high speeds because they're wider, drivers are more comfortable, they're able to attain those speeds and still feel safe, whether that's a false safety or not. The odds of a fatal at a 40-mile-per-hour crash are as high as 1 in 7, which is a much, for vulnerable users, which is a high risk for pedestrians. One factor that can help with long exposure is when vehicles stop for a signal or a stop sign. This makes vehicles more predictable. It gives the pedestrian opportunity to communicate or maybe judge what the driver is doing and determine if it's safe to go. Unsignalized roads are a lot trickier in that scenario because it's harder for a driver to make eye contact with or for the pedestrian to make eye contact with the driver to determine if the driver sees them, if the driver is intending to stop. It just makes it a more complex situation. Poor lighting at night can contribute to that inability even further. And so that's another those are two other factors that can sort of be a predictor of higher severity. There are ways to alleviate these types of danger at intersections by simply changing the characteristics that lead to greater risk. For example, a long exposure distance can be broken up with a pedestrian refuge or reduced with bulb-out sidewalks at the crosswalk. Other changes that will affect one or more road characteristics are signing and striping, lighting, changes in road capacity, lane narrowing, or adding or otherwise changing intersection control. Most of these changes can be accomplished at a low cost with minor construction activities. We evaluated intersections throughout Carson City. We'd established thresholds to determine which ones were of the greatest risk. In order to determine which ones were the greatest risk, we chose exposure crossing distance of greater than 45 feet. Intersections that are uncontrolled, by uncontrolled, I mean that you have locations where a side street stops, but the cross street is not stopping, they're just going through. Roads with higher speeds, we said greater than 35 miles per hour in this case. And then I wanted to further filter those down with whether or not they had lighting and whether or not there was a pedestrian demand at that location. After completing the evaluations, we identified 10 intersections as potentially high severity. Of these 10 intersections, 4 can be addressed in current projects, and another location can be addressed in an anticipated future project, which leaves us with 5 intersections. The 5 intersections are College Parkway and Imperial Way, College Parkway and Northgate Lane, Fairview Drive and Gordon Street, Fairview Drive and Desatoya Drive, and Fairview Drive and Edmonds Drive. On this slide, we also noted the critical crash rate differential, which is one of the statistics that was evaluated in the local road safety plan. So in the local road safety plan, you could expect the intersections that were identified had a critical crash rate differential between 0.09 and 0.39. And so the intersections we identified included ones that were in the local road safety plan like Carson and Nye, which are fairly high on that range, as well as some other intersections that are near to that range. For instance, all the Fairview Drive intersections we identified at 0.08, which are very close to the lower end of that range of the intersections that were identified as the worst in the local road safety plan.
The higher the number, the worse it is?
Yes.
Right, okay. Yeah.
That is correct.
0.39 is the worst, Nye.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
So staff are requesting to create a safety project that will determine needs and propose mitigations at each of these locations. We can then develop cost estimates for each of them and return to the board to discuss those proposed scopes. And during that time, staff will also pursue potential federal funds, and we'll follow up in the spring of 2025 with our proposed scope if it is approved by the board. Are there any questions?
Does anyone have a question? Ms. Maloney?
I was just confused. The title spoke to the College Parkway Pedestrian Safety Project, right? But then we're talking about additional projects on Fairview?
You must be referring to in
Just the agenda title.
It says College Parkway and Fairview Drive.
Not in my packet.
Yeah, Adam Tully, Deputy District Attorney. Yeah, the project name, that's just the project moniker, but the agenda title encompasses Fairview Lane as well.
It says, yeah, pedestrian safety at various intersections along College Parkway and Fairview Drive.
Okay,
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You, just the title of the project. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
We'd be happy to entertain any title anyone recommends. It's the title we picked.
Well, I just want to make sure if we're taking
Project
action on
title.
Fairview too, that we're falling within the scope of the agenda item. So it's great that we are.
We are. So can you talk to me a little bit when I look at saying, okay, these are what we're selecting and we can't select others because the title isn't broad enough to allow us to select others? Mr. Attorney. That one's a Mr. Attorney issue. But can you talk to me a little bit about Robinson and Solomon? What is going on there? That's an area that we had development and paving requirement. What's going on with that intersection? Just as a reminder for everyone what the conditions are on that one, because it's certainly a high traffic, high pedestrian
So
intersection for us.
Yeah, so in terms of our evaluation that we did in part of this project, that intersection would have been disqualified based upon speed, even though it is a very high volume, very high pedestrian demand location. Our threshold at 35 miles per hour would disqualify that intersection, so that's why we did not look into it further. As far as what's going on at the Robinson-Solomon intersection, Chris, do you want to jump in on this?
Absolutely, I'll jump
I
in on
almost
this.
can remember.
Chris Martinovich, Transportation Manager. As I believe this board knows, that Carson City has approved a development as part of the Lampa Ranch, various specific plan areas and various developments that go over time. Those developments have been conditioned to eventually erect a traffic signal at the intersection of Solomon and Robinson. We've received payment for a large portion of that traffic signal during one of the recently approved phases of that project, and the construction of that traffic signal would go into effect when there's actually more traffic associated with the MUTCD signal warrants. And so it's likely within probably the next 10 years, there'll be a traffic signal erected there, just not today, but that development has been conditioned to eventually construct that traffic signal at that intersection.
Thank you for that. I think it's important that sometimes I think people don't realize we are planning out, right? And it's when you hit a certain level or a condition is met, then we pull the trigger and you owe us a signal or whatever. So I get a lot of complaints about that while it may be a 15-mile-an-hour zone at certain hours, they might not be going at that speed, or that you see a lot of students not following the rules and just hopping across there. And it's a huge congested area, but it's not a huge crash area, right? Or we don't have a bunch of.
Well, I know it's an
traffic
area,
issues
I will note that our Safe Routes to School coordinator, Scott, has been having regular conversations with the school district related to various ideas that can be proposed at those locations, that intersection and other crossing locations on Solomon near the high school. We also have been looking at the speed limits on Robinson Street adjacent to the high school associated with new development in that area. And Casey's got some recommendations on that we'll be implementing to adjust speed limits and things like that in that area. So we're taking some steps. I really kind of want to let Safe Routes to School see if they can work with the school directly, and maybe there's an opportunity for crossing guards that can help mitigate that, or other coordination with other school groups that could assist. That's where I'd like to start at this point.
And then College Parkway and Fairview were selected based on the criteria, so there are not other intersections in Carson City that met those criteria? Or
Jumping
we
back.
purposely targeted this area?
Jumping back over to our 10 locations that were initially met the criteria, several of them are not on College Parkway, including one on Stewart Street, one on Carson and Nye, one on Carson and Silver Oak Drive. And so, but we have, those are going to be able to be addressed in other projects. And so it's just kind of coincidental that all the ones that are left are on College and Fairview, which are kind of a continuation of the same road to some degree. And it's entirely possible when we did the analysis, there could be other intersections added. We didn't name the project and then find a way to bring these in. It was like, this is how it came out.
That's
and so it
really
was
my
easy to name
question,
it.
right? Did any other intersection, is there an 11 through 20? That's my better question. Are there more?
There are not.
There are not. Wow. So
Well,
if we
it's
can
because of the
address
tight
these.
thresholds.
Right. Wow. We're making good progress then if we can address these over this next year or so.
I also wanted to note, and I don't know if Casey mentioned, and I apologize if he did, that periodically we do get some concerns from the sheriff's office, and one of these intersections, two of these actually, well, kind of nearby, College and Imperial and College and Northgate were two that the sheriff's office has commented on in the last couple of years of, hey, can we look at, see if we can't do something here? So that was another factor, just kind of going into the process of, high-speed intersection, what are the commonalities that we're looking at, and this was the list.
And then I'm trying to remember, I don't think or recall, did we have anybody else that was concerned about the two intersections that people came and testified are on this list, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
Over the years, we've had many calls about College and Northgate. We did a whole study looking at a RFB on College and Northgate. I continue to get calls all the time about College and Northgate, so I was thrilled to see it on the list.
But nobody else is getting a call on another intersection of concern. Well, this is way good news. Okay. Is there any public comment?
I've got,
Oh, you got some, I'm sorry, I
Oh, yeah.
apologize. I didn't see your little raised hand.
since I was our local road safety plan lead, that I think this is excellent. And, we're still waiting for feedback from NDOT on that plan as well. But this takes the whole process another step further, which was the whole point of doing a local
Right.
road safety plan. And I think most of us are familiar with these intersections, and I go, yeah, they do need some attention. So thank you very much, and if there's more better ideas, bring them up. Okay, thank you, Casey.
Thanks.
No, it's like you said, it's really actually exciting to see that we plan and then the next year we're executing on the plan. So, well done. Did I have any public comment? Nope. Okay, I'll accept a motion then. Ms. Maloney.
I move to approve the recommended projects as presented.
I will second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. Okay, we're now on to agenda item 5B, discussion and possible action regarding contract 25300-276 for Atkins Realis USA Inc., Atkins, to provide design services for the Fifth Street Rehab and Sewer Line Replacement Project for a total not to exceed of $278,468. Mr. Dotson, may I have your disclosure, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from voting when I have a disqualifying conflict. This item involves a contract with Atkins Realis USA, Inc. For the last few years, I've been employed by Atkins on a part-time periodic basis. Although my work for Atkins is infrequent, I still have a non-de minimis pecuniary interest in maintaining that private employment. Additionally, under NRS 281A.065, I am deemed to have a commitment in a private capacity to the interests of my private employer. Because the judgment of a reasonable person in my position would be materially affected by this relationship, I have a disqualifying conflict and I will not be voting on this matter.
Thank you for that. Okay, I will note just for the record on page 2 of 9 or 47 of your packet, under 1.3, it says a total of 12 with the number 7 meetings. It should be 7, not 12, 7 meetings. Just those two conflict with one another. Yeah, they don't say the same thing, so it is 7, correct? Okay. Is there any other highlights of this particular project that you need to disclose to us, Mr. Sylvester?
I don't think so. I think you covered it. I can answer any questions if there are any.
Does any member have anything except for Mr. Dotson on this one? Nothing? Nothing? Okay, is there any public comment on this contract? Mr. French?
Thank you, Chair. Denny French, Carson City. I just have a question. I didn't get to see the packet, but I would like to see what each of those projects would, if they were going to have the flasher lights, if they were thinking about reduction bumper or such. College Park is a really scary place to cross, especially at night, perhaps lights. But as far as the sewer and such deal, I would like also just to say thank you because I think those are necessary.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comment? So this motion would be as amended because we amended the 7.
I will do it.
Okay,
I move to approve the contract as amended and presented.
I second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the contract as amended. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no, and any with abstention? Let the record reflect it's a 401. Thank you so much. We're now on to agenda item 5C, discussion and presentation regarding revisions to the JAC Federal Fiscal Year 23-26 Transit Asset Management Plan and Carson City Public Works Trust Transit Transit Asset Maintenance Plan. That could come out wrong. Yeah, it was going to come out wrong. Mr. Martinovich, are you taking us through this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item is, as mentioned, revisions to the Transit Asset Management Plan as well as the Maintenance Plan for Jump Around Carson and Carson City. The revisions to these plans were necessitated by the recently completed FTA triennial review, which found that we were unable to keep up with the preventative maintenance schedule of 4,000 miles per preventative maintenance visit. As such, revisions to the policies, both policies have been made in coordination with fleet management staff, the FTA, and in reviewing manufacturer warranty best practices for the different types of vehicles that we have. This period we're proposing is 5,000 miles, up from 4,000, which is pretty consistent and on the low end of most of the manufacturer's suggested warranty periods, which tends to be 7 to 10,000 miles for different types of vehicles now. So still keeping in line with general policy as well as newer vehicles as they come online. The reason the TAM plan was amended was because the maintenance plan documents that period and it needed to be incorporated for consistency across both plans. The information documented in these plans has been provided to fleet staff, and training will be provided as part of the fleet's new rollout of their asset management software. I believe it's called Faster Fleet, where they're able to track maintenance activities on a mileage basis as well as warranty parts and durations and other features that traditionally we've had to monitor manually. So this new software and the rollout of this plan are going in conjunction with one another to ensure that they can be implemented and followed by all fleet staff and transit staff as well. Other revisions have been made to the both plans to update the tables and asset lists, as well as various elements for consistency of terms across the plans. But yeah, these plans have been implemented, and if anyone has any questions, happy to take them.
Does anyone have any questions or thoughts? Or Ms. Maloney?
Without going too deep into it, I believe it was 2 triennial reviews ago, Chris, and maybe I'm off, but we got a similar finding that we weren't meeting our transit vehicle maintenance schedules, and so we increased it to 4,000 miles from what I believe was 2,500. Do you recall, Chris?
Yeah, I did see that this plan had been revised in the past and had been increased previously. I think it was more than 2 triennials ago. The FTA was like, well, through a consultation with the FTA, they indicated it really needs to be based on what you need, what your vehicles are, what your fleet can do. We don't have any specific guidance on that, but they said they tend to see this range. They kind of gave us a range of 4,000 to 6,000 for most agencies, and we thought coordinating with the manufacturer warranty periods and things like that, this was a good middle range to that number.
I appreciate that. As staff, I think staff do their best. You do your best. I did my best to smooth things over and do what they say we can do, but I think it's long been known that fleet staff are stretched to the brink of exhaustion and failure, and I don't think it's right that we continue to extend the maintenance plan to potentially the detriment of our vehicles because the fleet staff are overworked. And so I think it's important just to note that this is a great solution, but at the root of that is there's too many vehicles and not enough fleet staff. And so I wanted to note that. Thanks.
Is that the issue they're working on other vehicles? So let me start differently. even my vehicle says, go get your oil changed and stuff at 5,000 miles. And it gives me a little thing which I have in my car right now that says maintenance due, right? It's got a little flasher. I'm like, oh, for Pete's sake, I got to go do that. But my question is it that 4,000 or the old 2,500 was the correct answer? And we're solving this because of a staff issue, or it's correct that the vehicle should be maintained or checkups at 5,000 miles? I want to make sure. There are two vastly different answers there. And so is 5,000 the correct answer based on the manufacturer's recommended maintenance?
I would say today, through coordination with fleet staff and reviewing manufacturer warranties, it looks like 5,000 is a reasonable range for that preventative maintenance based on the vehicles we have in our fleet today and the age of them. I think if we look at different vehicles, as we've discussed at CAMPO, if we look at more diesel or fewer diesel and things like that, that schedule could change because different vehicles have different requirements. In terms of how we got to this specific finding, and was it a staffing issue or was it a tracking issue? I think it's sort of both of those. It's sometimes difficult for us to see that, oh, that vehicle has gone 4,200 miles. We got to get that one in. Versus, well, that one's got 3,800. Well, let's run it a couple more hundred, then we'll bring it in. So what we try to do is when a vehicle gets close, if it comes in for, say, a windshield wiper fails or a door gets stuck and it's close, they're going to bring it in and they're going to do the preventative maintenance at that time, even if it hasn't met that criteria. But the tracking software in particular is going to solve the tracking issue, whereby we're not going to rely on necessarily the fueling mileage cards and then seeing that and reviewing that on a more manual basis. This software automatically inputs that and flags when those mileage points are hit, alerting our staff, whether it's 4,000, 5,000, 20,000, 1,000, whatever, that a preventative maintenance should be scheduled for that vehicle, and let's take that vehicle out of service and get it over to fleet. That's the new component here that's going to help us meet this going forward.
And then I just don't know the operation, so excuse my ignorance on that. So is it that only the fleet staff will see that it needs, so the user that's driving that vehicle around or whatever
Our operator
would be able to see that, like I said,
tracks
something
mileage
flag
as
them
well.
that says you need to take this in for maintenance?
Yeah,
So having that software will do both sides of it, not the manual fleet guy recording that he fixed the windshield wipers and go, oh my gosh, while I'm at it, I'm gonna do. So it'll actually trigger to the user when he's at the gas pump or something.
I don't know that it'll trigger it to the user at the gas pump. It'll trigger to management staff that the vehicle needs to be brought in. It won't trigger to the driver,
Not
per se,
to the driver.
who's fueling the vehicle. But I'll also note that as part of
Why is that
our
not in there?
part of our corrective action with this that we'll submit to the FTA is now we're tracking and have been for the last few weeks now the actual mileage of our vehicles so that we can see, okay, is the system working the way we're wanting it to do? We haven't been tracking vehicle mileage on a weekly basis. At least I haven't. I know First Transit tracks it all the time. I haven't been getting those reports, but I am getting those reports now so that I can be a back check to make sure the software works, fleet seeing it, First Transit seeing it, we're getting the vehicles in the period that we have to get them in.
Okay. I didn't realize it didn't have internal things that give you warnings. I assure you my Toyota does a good job of telling me to go spend $700 and get it tuned up. It does a really good job of telling me that. So, okay, does anybody else have any? They do? I feel better. I'm like, those big expensive buses, it takes everybody coming together to try and keep it all working. So, okay.
Yes, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Then. Since we are changing these mileages, are we assured or reasonably assured that the staff can do this?
Do it.
Or is it going to come back again, like Lucia had mentioned? So is it reasonable? Are they bought in, or do we have to hire somebody else?
Well, through my conversations with the fleet supervisor, that they're on board with this. They say they can meet that. I think they are still short-staffed. They've been trying to hire a fleet maintenance worker for months now, and they've been unable to get that person hired. So I think those challenges with staffing still persist, but this update and these revisions to the plan have been done in concert with the fleet supervisor.
Okay, that's a non-action item, so we will move on to agenda item 6A. Mr. Martinovich, do you have a report for us?
I do, thank you. Chris Martinovich, a couple of items I wanted to note. As this board's aware, the 2 ballot measures did not pass. That doesn't mean we're not doing anything. It means we're going to continue to deliver the projects that we have funding to deliver the projects for. And so Casey's mentioned some new safety improvement projects, but in the meantime, we're continuing to progress on projects on 5th Street, Fairview, Stewart Street, Roop Street, Little Lane. Those projects are still going, and we're still working away on those. Also, I anticipate we're planning to start the next project prioritization process after the start of the new year and the pavement survey data comes in. My recommendation, and again, we can discuss this as a board at a future date at all of your discretion, is to continue to prioritize both regional and local road projects through the process that we outlined back in June. I think more data is good data, and so that'd be my plan going forward. But I'm happy to entertain a future agenda item at your all discretion on anything related to road funding. Another item we made was an administrative revision to the Jack ADA policy related to records retention. This was another discussion topic related to the FTA training or review, whereby the FTA said, hey, this might be an area you might want to beef up to avoid a finding in the future. So we amended our ADA policy to clarify the records retention period. We just indicated that we were retaining records, but it didn't say how long. We just added a period of 7 years in there to make sure that finding never occurs for Jack specifically. I mentioned safe routes.
Chris, is that in our city? Did that translate to the city's record retention?
It matches to the
policy?
city's record retention
Okay,
policy.
just want to make
We're
sure we don't
consistent,
change
yeah.
it in one place and not change it in the master.
We mirrored that. We didn't create a new records retention.
Okay,
So.
thank you. I'm working on other legislation. I'm like,
On the Safe Routes to School front, I wanted to acknowledge Scott. He's been engaging with a variety of cooperating agencies and members with the Sheriff's Office, the Washoe Tribe, CASA, Muscle Power, the School District, and the Office of Traffic Safety to really align messaging in regards to pedestrian and vulnerable user safety in school zones. They're looking at rolling out some crossing guard training. They're looking at various outreach events, as I mentioned, the Driver Awareness Safety Week. That could be an opportunity to work with Safe Routes to School and educate folks about school zone safety. So he's doing a lot of work trying to get everybody kind of on the same message. And he's been working on some public safety outreach messages for the movie theaters, where when you go into a movie and the previews, there could be a message about safety and school zone safety there. So he's working on those types of things. I just wanted to put that out there in case you see any of those items.
Can I speak to that really quickly? In terms of safety, Solomon and Robinson, for example, I think one safety issue is students are taking so long to cross the street, and it's almost like
I think they do it on purpose.
Right, which they're teenagers, and I understand. But I worry sometimes that a frustrated driver might just barrel through. And so just when he's giving his presentations, if he could just a friendly reminder to students that we care about you, and people who are stopped, they want to give you the time you need to safely cross, but also please be mindful of the cars waiting as well. So pedestrians first, and then, but just be thoughtful crossers.
That concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll move on to agenda item 6B, street operations.
On the street operations report, I wanted to note a couple of items. The first one I wanted to note is curb gutter sidewalk flat work. Most of that work occurred on Winnie Lane in late September. A number of sidewalk that was really in poor condition. Curb and gutter was in poor condition. A lot of work was done there. In addition, I wanted to note down in the stormwater box, linear foot of ditch cleared. that number's higher this month. In fact, it's most of the fiscal year's amount for September. Work was done primarily in the Winnie Lane, Appian Way, and Ryan Way streets. They've been really getting out and doing a lot of stormwater improvements, and Greg King, the street supervisor, he told me, he said even the public's been noticing that the ditches look really good. So I wanted to highlight that and pass it on to the board.
Anybody has anything? Okay. Then we'll move on to agenda item 6C. So
6C, we have our revenue, fuel tax and revenue summaries has been updated, and I believe, Madam Chair, you have an item as well. You wanted to bring
yeah,
up.
I just, I recall from last meeting, there was just a little bit of thought process on the gasoline revenues, why the summary of the 6.35 cents was not 2/3 of the amount that you receive from the line above. You're like, it intuitively does not look correct. And I said, no, there's a bunch of wacky formulas, which is there are, and it really breaks down. But I thought just for yours, and I did put some in the back of the room too, that it's really important that you understand the dynamics of the gas taxes and nothing. So we don't get all the money that we generate in Carson City. And I think it's important just to put that out. But in case you were super excited, you could read this and go, what do you mean? It's 1/3 based on that and 1/4 of this and 1/4 of that. And so one of the taxes, we only get 4%. You know, it's put into a big pot and then split out across all the counties. So in the year, we look like we're missing $1 million. Well, it's not. It's because it's a formula-driven document. So I just thought you'd like to learn about all the gas taxes from each level, the state level, the federal level, our level. So hope you enjoy the document. Ms. Maloney?
Mayor Bagwell, I appreciate your leadership on this. There's a lot of documents on the RTC, like transportation websites, and I'm wondering if there's a digital version of this that could be posted to help
It's good,
inform
huh?
those public members that want to learn more. It's really good.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good document. And I will state for the record too that, so I really want to thank the city manager, Nancy Paulson, and Andy from the treasurer's office and myself have taken it upon ourselves to audit a month to actually walk through, right? To say, well, because it's really interesting to see a spreadsheet that comes from DOT that says a person's name has validated the distribution. And so we try to validate the distribution, and I don't get to see the formulas. I only have hard numbers in them, but we don't quite get there. And so it's like, we're going to practice one ourselves, because I think it's imperative, you know, that we have confidence in the numbers and that we have confidence that we're getting all the dollars that we're supposed to be receiving, because some of them even, and it's in there for each of them to tell you that they changed that law so many years ago. You even have hold harmless for, you don't get less than you got in 2003, and you don't get less than you got in 2005. And so it's like, well, let's just check that out and see.
There was an example in 2016 when Pat Pittenger found we weren't getting part of our apportionment. And so those audits are really important and helpful. People just make mistakes. Thanks for doing that.
Like I said earlier, you can't get, I don't know about any of you, but when you have 1,000 lines in your spreadsheet, if you transpose somebody's land area, then somebody else is either gaining or getting away. So I just think it's imperative, and wanted to just put out on the record that I think it's great data.
Right.
Mhm.
Got a comment. I mean, most of this comes from NDOT's annual report. There's
Correct.
quite a bit other information in there too. So I
Right.
recommend you look at the whole thing, because some of it applies to us. And then realistically, this is NRS, right? And there's a session coming up.
Yep.
So I don't know if anything's going to change, but
I-
yeah,
I
that's
think
why you have
that-
to watch it.
I think times you can look at you know, because what happens is when you go to redistribute something, it means you're taking it from someone else, right? Because the pie didn't get bigger. It's just whose pie you're going to move around. But Carson City's issue on this is we're small geographically. So you look at it and go, oh, great, White Pine County gets more than we do. Right? Because again, we're very small, but I hope that you just can have this as a good reference for all you want to know about gas taxes. So, thank you. And afraid to ask, yeah, or you might be afraid to ask now that you have this because it got more complex. But anyway, enjoy the document. And I did turn one into the secretary and put one in the back for record. And then if you can add it, it'd be great. Is there anything else any of you guys want to share with RTC? We're good. Okay, do I have any final public comment? We did it. Well, with that, we are adjourned. What a great meeting. We had a lot.